New Mexico has a retirement offer most people have never heard of. In specific counties, on specific land, under state laws that exist well outside the usual real estate conversation, there are retirees living right now with energy bills near zero, annual property tax bills under $300, and land they bought for less than a used car. Some of them bought it from the state government for back taxes, and the opening bid was $500. The system most people retire into assumes you're plugged in to the grid, to municipal water, to a property tax base that keeps climbing. New Mexico and the right counties doesn't make that assumption. This video covers 7 of those specific angles. 5 towns where the geography, zoning, and land prices create a real opening, and 2 mechanisms written into state law that change the financial math entirely. Here are 7 New Mexico places where you can live off-grid for almost free. Belen. Belen sits at the northern edge of Socorro County, and that county doesn't have a formal planning and zoning department. New Mexico's Construction Industries Division technically holds statewide jurisdiction over residential building, but enforcing that requires local inspectors, and Socorro doesn't have them. In the unincorporated stretches around Belen, earthbag homes, shipping container dwellings, and permanent RV setups exist without the permitting friction that kills these projects elsewhere in the Southwest. 1-acre lots in the Rio Grande Estate subdivision near Belen run between $1,950 and $4,500, with owner financing at $59 to $90 a month. Annual property taxes average $102 for the year. The soil's clay to sand ratio supports earthbag and adobe construction from on-site materials, which cuts build costs significantly. The nearest hospital is 27 miles from Magdalena. Manageable for most, but worth factoring in. Deming. Deming logs 3,684 sunshine hours annually, one of the highest totals in the United States by actual measurement. That number makes off-grid solar function here at a level it doesn't function in most places. People running refrigerators, lights, and well pumps entirely on solar power in Deming are paying $0 to a utility company every month. Half-acre to 1-acre lots in Deming ranchettes and frontier ranchos list between $1,400 and $4,300, most with no HOA. The trade-off is real: 10 inches of annual rain, summer highs near 98 degrees, and a well that costs $18,000 to $28,000 to drill. Most off-gridders here start with water hauling, filling 500-gallon tanks at municipal stations for a few dollars a load, and build toward a permanent well over time. The heat and the sunshine are the same thing, that's the trade. Pie Town. Pie Town sits inside Clayton County, the largest county by land area in New Mexico, and one of the least populated places in the continental United States. Those 2 facts sit at the root of everything that makes it viable for off-grid retirement. The land is affordable because almost no one is competing for it, and the conditions that keep people away are also the conditions that make the energy math work. Pie Town sits at approximately 7,800 feet above sea level. At that elevation, the atmosphere is physically thinner, meaning less air separates the sun from the ground. Thinner air transmits more solar radiation per square meter, which produces a measurable increase in photovoltaic panel output compared to lower elevation regions with the same nominal sunshine hours. Pie Town logs 3,378 annual sunshine hours. At that altitude, the solar energy density is among the highest recorded anywhere in North America. For a retiree whose single largest ongoing expense in an off-grid life is energy storage and generation, the physics of this elevation are working in your favor before you've installed a single panel. The property tax structure reinforces the appeal. The effective rate in Clayton County runs between 0.37 and 0.58%, among the lowest in a state that already has low effective rates compared to the national average. Annual tax bills on undeveloped land in the county are frequently documented below $300, not below $300 a month, below $300 for the year. Land comes in larger parcels than in the southern towns. The standard offering around Pie Town is 10 to 40 acres rather than the 1-acre residential lots common near Belen or Deming. A 40-acre parcel in the Pie Town area is available in the range of $19,000 to $42,000, depending on road access, terrain, and any existing improvements like stock tanks or fencing. The per-acre price is competitive. The total entry cost is higher because you're buying more land. land, which also means more privacy and a meaningful buffer between you and your neighbors. Clayton County receives 12 to 13 inches of annual precipitation, with approximately 26 inches of snowfall near Pytown. Snowmelt is catchable, and roof-based rainwater catchment systems are standard practice in the community. Not an experimental technique, but an established one. Those systems supplement well water, and combined with the graywater law covered later in this video, extend the functional water supply through dry stretches in ways that make the scarcity manageable. There's also a secondary financial benefit to the larger parcel standard here that tends to go unmentioned. When you own 40 acres in an area with no municipal services, the cost of connecting to utilities at a remote corner of your property doesn't apply. Well, there are no utilities to connect to. The entire operating model is self-contained from the first day. That clarity eliminates a class of decisions, whether to hook up, where to run a line, what it costs to extend a connection, that slow down and complicate off-grid builds in areas where partial grid infrastructure exists nearby. The community of Pytown also has a functioning informal network of residents who have been solving the same logistical problems for years. Finding someone who has drilled a well at a comparable depth, built a catchment system that works in the local snowpack cycle, or navigated the county's permit process for a particular structure type is a matter of local conversation rather than isolated research. That knowledge transfer reduces the cost of first-year mistakes that new off-grid builders typically make. The remoteness is real and should be stated plainly. Clayton County has no hospital. Emergency services operate at a rural scale for retirees who need frequent access to specialists or who carry health conditions where response time matters. The isolation is the binding constraint regardless of how favorable the solar profile is. For a healthy mobile retiree who wants acreage, low annual costs, and an energy system that runs efficiently without grid dependence, Pytown offers a combination that is difficult to match at any price in the United States. Tres Piedras. Every other town in this video is affordable, partly because something is absent. Fewer rules, fewer services, less enforcement of what residents build on their land. Tres Piedras works from a different premise, and understanding that difference is what makes it useful for a different kind of retiree. The Earthship Biotexture headquarters has operated on the mesa, west of the Rio Grande Gorge near Tres Piedras, for decades. The Greater World Earthship community, there is a full residential neighborhood, not a demonstration project, not a research site, but a place where people live year-round with no municipal water, no grid power, and no sewage connections to any county system. Residents collect rainwater, generate solar electricity, and manage all waste on site. It exists in documented cooperation with Taos County, not in spite of it. That history has produced something that doesn't exist in the other towns on this list, a planning department that has already processed enough owner-builder permit applications for unconventional structures that your project doesn't arrive as a conceptual puzzle. In most rural counties, an application to build an earth bag or rammed earth home with no utility connections triggers a conversation about whether the project is even permissible. In Taos County, that baseline conversation has already happened collectively over decades. You're building on accumulated precedent rather than trying to establish it yourself, and that distinction saves real time and money. Rural land in Tres Piedras, north of Taos proper, across the gorge from the Mesa community, runs from approximately $500 to $3,000 per acre depending on site conditions and road access. The effective property tax rate sits around 0.45%. Green building professionals are present in the local area in a concentration that doesn't exist in the more isolated towns, which meaningfully reduces the learning curve for new arrivals who don't bring construction expertise with them. The Tres Piedras Water Association provides an organizational safety net for off-grid residents whose rainwater catchment systems fall short during drought years. That backup option changes the risk profile of the water situation here compared to towns where no such infrastructure exists. It isn't a substitute for a sound personal water system, but knowing it's there as a fallback is a different position than having no fallback at all. The climate on the mesa is demanding and deserves a direct description. Average January lows reach 11 degrees Fahrenheit. Winds off the Rio Grande Gorge are persistent and strong through spring. Passive solar design is not an optional upgrade here. It's the mechanism that makes the home functional through winter without conventional heating costs. A well-designed structure with sufficient thermal mass absorbs solar energy during the more than 300 annual sunshine. days and releases it slowly through cold nights. The physics work, and the community that has been demonstrating them for decades is present and accessible to new arrivals. What the thermal mass concept means in practice is worth spelling out for anyone who hasn't encountered it. A standard wood frame home loses its interior heat quickly through walls, windows, and gaps. A structure built with thick earthen or tire walls stores heat during the day and radiates it through the night, the way a stone path stays warm after dark. In a climate with abundant daytime sun and cold nights, which precisely describes the Taos Mesa, that storage function replaces the need for an active heating system through most of the winter. It's not magic, and it requires a well-executed design, but it's proven physics that the community on the Mesa has applied at scale. The entry point for most retirees in Tres Piedras is not a fully engineered Earthship, it's the simpler structures in the rural subdivisions around the town. Basic adobe or cabin builds permitted under rural guidelines on land priced under $3,000 an acre. What the land price also includes, implicitly, is access to a community that has spent decades working out how to do this. That accumulated knowledge doesn't show up as a line item in any listing, but it has a real effect on how quickly and cheaply a new resident can get established. Truth or consequences? Truth or Consequences, shortened to T or C by anyone who lives or works there, is built around a geological feature that doesn't appear anywhere else in this video. The town and its surrounding unincorporated land in Sierra County sit over accessible geothermal hot springs. This is not a resort amenity attached to a hotel. It's a geological condition that extends into the landscape and gives the area an energy characteristic that directly changes the monthly cost of off-grid living. Heating a home through winter is expensive regardless of how it's done. In the towns to the north, Pie Town at 7,800 feet, Tres Piedras with 11-degree January lows. Winter heating represents a real and ongoing energy demand that solar panels alone don't always satisfy efficiently. In the unincorporated areas around T or C, in communities like Cuchillo and Monticello, proximity to geothermal resources changes what home heating actually costs. The thermal energy is already in the ground beneath the property. Geothermal heating requires infrastructure to access, pipes, a pump, a heat exchange system, but once that infrastructure is installed, the ongoing input cost reflects the geology rather than the energy market. For a retiree on a fixed income who is trying to decouple monthly expenses from utility rate fluctuations, that distinction carries real financial weight. Energy prices change. The temperature of the ground beneath Sierra County does not. There is a contrast worth drawing here with a purely solar-dependent setup. In the northern towns, Pie Town, Tres Piedras, solar handles electricity well, but heating through a hard winter typically requires a backup source. Propane, wood, or a solar thermal system that adds cost and complexity. In the geothermal zones around T or C, that backup heating cost either disappears or shrinks substantially. The result is that the total off-grid system cost here can be lower. But then in towns with better solar profiles, precisely because one of the most expensive components of the northern off-grid setup isn't required, the land in the unincorporated areas around T or C is effectively unrestricted. Cuchillo and Monticello have no square footage minimums, no HOA structures, and no prohibition on placing RVs, mobile homes, or small manufactured structures on the property. 1-acre lots near Cuchillo are available for under $10,000. The county's effective property tax rate sits at 0.77%, below the national average, and the residential mill rate was reduced in several districts in 2024, so the annual holding cost is moving in the right direction. The county's median annual property tax bill is $335. For raw, undeveloped land, the obligation is lower than that figure, and the trend is downward. The lack of square footage minimums in the unincorporated areas is more significant than it might appear. Many counties across the rural Southwest technically permit off-grid living, but impose minimum home size requirements, often 800 or 1,000 square feet, that effectively require a full construction project before anyone can legally occupy the property. In Sierra County's unincorporated stretches outside T or C, you can park a well-maintained RV, set up a solar system, and begin living on the land while you plan and build a permanent structure at your own pace. That flexibility keeps the entry cost low and gives a new new resident time to understand the land before committing capital to a structure. Water logistics around T or C also work in favor of the early stage hauling strategy that most off-gridders use while they're getting established. Elephant Butte Reservoir, the largest reservoir in New Mexico, measuring roughly 40 miles long, sits just outside town and supports a municipal water system from which residents can haul. The practical combination of accessible haul water, a declining property tax rate, and geothermal heating potential compresses the recurring monthly cost structure below what most other locations in the state can offer. The necessary qualification on the geothermal value is that access is not uniform across the county. A parcel directly over an active geothermal source is a different situation from a parcel in the general area. What's accessible, at what depth, and with what infrastructure required to use it are site-specific questions that need site-specific answers before a purchase, not after. Sierra County's general geothermal character is real and documented in the geological record. Whether it applies to any individual parcel is the research a buyer has to do. For the retiree who does that homework and finds land with confirmed access, the heating cost profile that results is genuinely unusual and hard to replicate anywhere else in New Mexico. Magdalena. Magdalena sits in Socorro County, about an hour's drive west of the Rio Grande, and it's the right place to understand something that applies to every town in this video. New Mexico has a graywater law that is among the most permissive in the United States, and in a high desert area like Magdalena, where water is the resource that governs what's possible on any piece of rural land, and where annual rainfall barely reaches 13 inches. It changes the math in ways that no other single factor does. Under Section 74-6-2 of the New Mexico Statutes Annotated, any residential property in the state can divert up to 250 gallons of graywater per day to landscape irrigation or composting. No application required, no filing. The law allows it outright with a defined set of safety conditions. Graywater under this statute is wastewater from bathing, showers, and laundry machines. Toilet waste remains black water and routes to a septic system. Kitchen sink and dishwasher water is excluded because of food particle and grease contamination risk, but the water draining from the shower each morning and the washing machine each week can be legally redirected to drip or flood irrigation in a garden rather than into a septic tank. The practical implication in a water-scarce environment is straightforward. A household of 2 adults produces roughly 100 to 150 gallons of graywater per day from bathing and laundry alone. Under New Mexico law, all of that can go to the garden. Every gallon that arrives on the property, whether hauled from a municipal station or pumped from a well, is effectively used twice. The first use is personal hygiene or laundry inside the home. The second use is irrigation of food crops or ground cover outside it. For someone water hauling near Deming, this cuts the frequency of haul trips roughly in half for the same productive water use. That's a direct reduction in time, fuel, and wear on the vehicle and trailer involved in every load. For someone on a well near Pytown where precipitation is limited and the dry season stretches long, the graywater diversion extends the functional yield of every gallon pumped. And for anyone attempting to grow food on desert land around Magdalena, where soil moisture is the limiting variable on most days, redirecting graywater to the garden makes kitchen scale food production viable through stretches when rainfall alone would leave the soil too dry to sustain plants. The technical requirements in the law are specific. Graywater cannot be sprayed. Application must be drip or flood irrigation, because spraying creates aerosolized particles that could carry pathogens. Systems must be designed to overflow into the conventional septic system in the event of a blockage or failure. The application point must maintain at least 5 vertical feet of separation from the groundwater table, and the installation must be sited outside any designated floodway. These conditions exist for sound sanitary reasons, and they're workable for anyone setting up an off-grid property with any care. A basic drip system fed from a graywater diversion isn't a complicated installation. A laundry to landscape system, diverting the washing machine drain to a subsurface drip line or mulch basin in the yard, is the most common starting point because washing machines have a gravity-fed discharge that makes the plumbing straightforward. It can be done without professional plumbing work by someone comfortable with basic PVC connections. A shower diversion is slightly more involved because it requires opening a wall or accessing the drain below a floor, but it's well within the skill range of someone who has done basic home improvement work. The cost of either system is a fraction of what a single additional well water haul trip runs over a season. The septic system requirement for black water doesn't go away under this law. What does change is the size and cost of the drain field that septic system needs. A drain field size to handle only toilet waste is substantially smaller and less expensive to install than one designed to handle all household liquid waste combined. When the graywater is going to the garden legally and permit-free, the septic handles a much smaller volume, and the infrastructure cost reflects that. In towns like Magdalena, where startup capital is the primary constraint on getting established, that reduction matters. 250 gallons per day, no permit, no fee, in a state where water is the binding resource on nearly every piece of affordable rural land. This is the rule that closes the gap. There's a longer-term financial implication in this that connects directly to retirement budgeting. A household that produces a meaningful share of its own food from a garden reduces its monthly grocery bill, which is typically one of the larger variable expenses in a fixed income budget. In a climate where growing seasons are compressed and soil moisture is the limiting variable, the graywater diversion is the mechanism that makes kitchen-scale food production viable without a dedicated water budget for irrigation. The graywater isn't an extra resource, it's water already being used, redirected rather than wasted. For a retiree trying to bring total monthly outflows below a specific threshold, the combination of near-zero energy costs from solar, low property taxes, and a reduced grocery bill from a garden fed by graywater is where the almost free framing in this video's title actually comes from. Clayton. Clayton is the county seat of Union County in northeastern New Mexico, and it's the kind of town that most retirement planning conversations never reach. The high plains around Clayton and the neighboring counties, Harding to the south, Colfax to the west, hold some of the lowest priced land in the state, but the most cost-effective pathway to acquiring it isn't through a listing, it's through a government auction. New Mexico's Property Tax Division conducts annual auctions in each county to recover delinquent property taxes on real property that has gone unpaid for 3 or more years. The minimum bid covers only the accumulated debt to the state. In rural counties like Union, Harding, and Colfax, where land is cheap and annual tax bills are already small, that minimum bid reflects a small debt, and the starting price reflects that. In these counties, it is documented that acreage has sold at these auctions for total bids between $500 and $2,000. $500, not per acre, not per year. The complete amount paid to take possession of the land and receive a deed transferring title. The legal mechanism is clean and immediate. New Mexico tax deeds extinguish the previous owner's interest upon recording. There is no right of redemption in this state. The former owner cannot come back afterward and reclaim the property by paying what was owed. Possession transfers the day the deed is issued. For a buyer who has done thorough research in advance, this is the most direct and cost-efficient legal pathway to land ownership available in New Mexico. Auctions for Harding, Union, and Colfax counties are scheduled for March 2026. That is a specific near-term window. Anyone who wants to participate has a concrete timeline to work toward and prepare against. The preparation is where most of the work actually lives, and it is not optional. Registration on auction day opens between 8 and 10 in the morning. There is no accommodation for late registration. Payment must be made by cashier's check, money order, or bank guaranteed check. Personal checks are not accepted, and neither are wire transfers arranged after the auction concludes. You arrive with the correct payment instrument already in hand, or you cannot bid. More critically, the pre-auction research determines whether what you're bidding on is worth acquiring. Tax deeds extinguish the previous owner's interest, but they do not automatically clear every encumbrance on the property. Certain federal interests, easements held by the Bureau of Land Management for instance, can survive a tax sale and remain attached to the land after the deed transfers. Access rights established by prior owners may also survive. Some properties on these auction lists are landlocked, meaning no legal road access exists to reach them from a public right-of-way. Some parcels are in flood zones. Some carry easement complications that restrict what a new owner can build or use. All of this is researchable before the auction through the county clerk's office in the relevant county, where title histories and lien records are on file as public records. A retiree with the time and mobility to do that research, visiting the county clerk, reviewing the title history of each parcel under serious consideration, making a site inspection before the auction date, arrives at the sale with more information than most of the other bidders. Rural county tax auctions are not typically attended by large professional real estate investment operations. situations with legal teams reviewing every parcel. The competition is often local buyers with general interest and incomplete information. A prepared, systematic buyer from outside the county who has done the homework is in a strong position. The site visit matters as much as the title research. A parcel with a clear title but no legal road access to reach it is a problem that shows up during a physical inspection and not always in the clerk's records. Terrain features that make a parcel unusable for building. A dry arroyo that floods annually. A slope too steep for a foundation. Soil conditions that rule out a conventional septic location are things you can see on the ground and not always deduce from a county map. A prepared buyer who has visited the land, walked the access, and checked the surrounding parcels for context is making a decision with a complete picture. That preparation is not common at these auctions, and the advantage it provides is real. The documented outcome that makes Clayton and its neighboring counties worth covering is this: 10 acres of rural New Mexico land for a total outlay under $2,500. That outcome requires preparation, requires physical presence on auction day, and requires the research to be completed in advance rather than improvised on the morning of the sale. For a retiree with time and a willingness to treat land, acquisition as a deliberate project rather than a quick transaction, this is the most cost-effective legal entry point into off-grid land ownership in the state, and the March 2026 auction window is the nearest opportunity on the calendar. The pattern running through all 7 chapters points to something consistent about how New Mexico's off-grid affordability actually works. It is not an accident, and it is not simply low population. It is the product of several distinct and overlapping conditions arriving in the same place at the same time. Towns where regulatory infrastructure was never built because the population never demanded it. A solar profile that ranges from strong to exceptional across the state's central and southern regions. A graywater law that is among the most permissive in the country, and that extends the utility of scarce water in ways that no other single factor does. And a delinquent tax auction system that, in the right rural counties, produces land prices that the open real estate market cannot replicate. None of this is obscure in the sense of being classified. The graywater statute is public record and has been on the books for years. The auction schedules are published by the property tax division. The county tax rates are on file at every county assessor's office in the state. What makes these mechanisms unfamiliar to most people doing retirement research is that conventional retirement planning operates within the normal real estate market. Zillow listings, median home prices, cost of living indices, and these pathways exist outside that market. You have to go looking for them specifically, and most people planning retirement don't know to look. The trade-offs are real and belong in any complete account of this option. Water scarcity is a genuine constraint across every town in this video, and the cost of solving it permanently through a well is a significant capital expenditure regardless of where in New Mexico the land sits. Medical access in the most affordable areas is limited. The Socorro area has a hospital 27 miles from Magdalena, but Clayton County has no hospital at all, and Sierra County's services reflect its small population. Deming's summer heat requires cooling strategies built into the structure from the beginning. The Taos Mesa's winter cold requires the same attention to thermal design. These are the conditions that make the land affordable, and they are also the conditions a resident has to live within. It's worth being specific about what the financial picture actually looks like when these factors are working together. A retiree near Belen who bought an acre for $3,000 with owner financing, built a basic earth bag structure from on-site soil, installed a modest battery-backed solar array, and is using the graywater law to irrigate a small kitchen garden might be carrying total monthly fixed costs. Land payment, property tax amortized monthly, solar loan if financed, in the range of $150 to $250. That number doesn't include food, transportation, healthcare, or other personal expenses, but the infrastructure cost of simply existing on the land and keeping the lights on can genuinely approach that range. Compare it to the average monthly utility plus tax burden in a conventional American household, and the gap is substantial. The people who are living this life successfully in New Mexico are not people who arrived without knowing about those conditions. They're people who assessed the trade accurately, found that it worked for their specific situation, and built accordingly. The retirees already paying $100 annual tax bills near Belen, already running their solar arrays through Deming's 3,684 annual sunshine hours, already hauling water from Elephant Butte Reservoir to their parcels outside T or C. They're not in those places by accident. They're there because the math worked out for them, Whether the math works for any individual reader or viewer depends on their health, their mobility, their starting capital, and what they actually want their daily life to look like. Those are questions only the person asking them can answer. What this video has tried to do is lay out the specific mechanisms, the towns, the laws, the auction system, the solar conditions, the water rules, accurately enough that the question can be answered from real information rather than speculation. The tools are on the table. The next step belongs to the person who decides to pick one up.